screen share. All right, so just FYI, the Katzes are in Charlotte, North Carolina, visiting children and grandchildren, so will not be joining us tonight. So I actually I want to go back towards um, uh, Pirkei Avot chapter 2, Mishnah 10, before we look at Mishnah 11, which is where we're supposed to start tonight, and hopefully you'll see that there's a method to my madness for doing that. Okay, so just to quickly go over the last Mishnah that we did 2 weeks ago. So these are statements from Rabbi Eliezer. And he said, let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own. Be not easily provoked to anger. Repent one day before your death, which, like, the standard gloss on that is, since you never know when you're going to die, you should repent every day. And then he also said, warm yourself before the fire of the wise, but beware of being singed by their glowing coals, for their bite is the bite of a fox, and their sting is the sting of a scorpion, and their hiss is the hiss of a serpent, and all their words are like coals of fire. Okay, so now I want to go on to Mishnah 11, which are statements attributed to Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Joshua. And he said, Ayin hara, the Yetzer hara, the Sinat habriot, motzi'in et ha'adam min ha'olam. Okay, so an evil eye and the evil inclination and hatred for humankind put a person out of the world. Okay, now, evil eye, I mean, right, like all of us, I mean, you can't grow up as an Ashkenazi Jew of our generation and not know about the evil eye, right? I mean, certainly in my family, like, whenever you said something good, it had to be followed by Kanahara, or else Kanahara poo poo poo, right? Kanahara, I don't know if people know what Kanahara really means. It's like, it's really Cain, and different pronunciations depending on where your grandparents came from. Kain means no in Yiddish, and ayin hara means the evil eye, right? So when you say kanahara, you're literally saying no evil eye, right? No evil eye. This good thing happened to me, no evil eye. But if you remember a couple of weeks ago, maybe even longer, we had a statement that one of the character traits that one should strive to inculcate is a good eye, right? So this is a bad eye, meaning presumably the opposite, right? A good eye means the ability to see the good, right? In other people, in other situations. So in this case, an evil eye, a bad eye, would be, like I said when we were discussing that Mishnah, as some people do, to see, and again, pardon my language, to see the world through shit-colored glasses, right? To always see the bad, the negative in every situation. Yes, Sue.
Would it be sort of like Would it be sort of like seeing the world, like a glass half full or a glass kind of, in other words, you have a situation and you could look at the good side of it, or, you could just look at the bad side.
Right, exactly. I mean, you put it more delicately than I did,
Oh,
right? But conceptually, right, the same thing, right? And we all know people like that, right? We all know people like that who, um, are always, focusing on the negative, right? I mean, like, there's this classic joke about, um, a family, a person went, I don't know, let's say a cruise, or, I mean, it was originally in the Catskills, right? Back when they had the resorts in the Catskills, but now we'll say a cruise, right? And they went on a cruise and their friends asked him, you know, okay, so how was the food on the cruise, right? And what did they say? Terrible, absolutely hard, like literally inedible, the worst food I ever was served in my entire life, and the portions were too small. Right. Right. I mean, right. But we know people like that, right? Right. Everything is bad. Everything is bad. Okay, so that's an evil eye, at least again, if Bartanura's understanding of this is to be accepted as correct. Okay, and Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and when we get to the next Mishnah, I'll explain that a little bit more. I will tell you that in the Gemara, right? Because Yetzer Hara, we say the evil inclination, right? But that may not be a great translation, right? Because I mean, I think a better translation should be like the egotistical inclination, or the acquisitive inclination, or even the id, right? Because it says in the Talmud that if not for the Yetzer Hara, nobody would ever take a spouse or build a house, right? And obviously, from the traditional perspective, taking a spouse and building a house, these are good things, right? So, but there is an inclination that could also be harmful. So you have to channel it in the right way. Okay. V'sinat habriot, and hatred for humankind. And again, what does that mean? Bartanura says that it means basically you just don't like people. And you want to spend all of your time by yourself, right? Because you basically don't like people, right? So you don't want to interact with them. And then he goes on to say, because if you remember Hillel, so there's a few Mishnayot back, right? Al tifrosh min hatzibur, right? Do not separate yourself from the community. And Bartanura says this trait of hatred of humanity is connected to that mission of not separating yourself from the community. How so? Right? Because I don't like other people. If I don't like other people, why in the world would I ever go to shul with them? Right? Why would I want to pray with them? I'd rather just stay home, daven by myself, etc. Right? And technically, look, technically, you don't have to ever go to shul. Right? You have to daven, but you can daven by yourself. Right? But that would violate the Hillel's statement of do not separate yourself from the community. Okay. And if you hate other people, motzi'in et ha'adam min haolam, it puts you out of the world. Why? Because you're always just by yourself and you're not interacting with others. You're not part of a community. You're not part of a shul, etc., etc. Okay. Any questions or comments on what we did for the last 10, 15 minutes? All right. So if not, so here's what I want to do. Because we just look at these statements and we don't know a lot about the rabbis to whom these statements are attributed, right? And partly that's my fault because I either know something about them and didn't share that, or don't know that much about them myself and didn't do sufficient prep work. But also because maybe, doesn't really matter to us. I mean, we're looking at what they said and not so much who said it, right? But Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua are like important figures in the Talmud, okay? And they are always disputing with each other, okay? And so there is a famous Talmudic passage from Baba Metzia. It's called the Tanur Shel Achnai, the Achnai oven. And it is a passage with which many contemporary Jews have at least some familiarity. Okay, I have either taught it or referenced it in a sermon or whatever a few times over the course of my tenure here. I have no knowledge of the fact, but I would be surprised if Rabbi Raphael had not taught or referred to it a few times over the course of his tenure. So I want to look at that, and that's not directly connected to these Mishnahs that we just studied. It's just that we studied a Mishnah with statements of Rabbi Eliezer and one with statements of Rabbi Joshua. So I want to look, and these are the antagonists in this sugya, in this, I don't know how you say sugya in English. I can say pericope, but that is an English word, but not a well-known English word either, right? This like section. So let me switch to that. Okay, and so, and I'm gonna like try and get through this as quickly as I can. All right, so there's this certain type of oven called the oven of Achnai, and they're discussing whether this oven can contract impurity or not. Okay, and so they argue about this the whole day, and Rabbi Eliezer is on one side and everybody else is on the other. Okay, this is in the Sanhedrin, in the academy. Okay, so Sanhedrin has 70 members. So it's Rabbi Eliezer on one side, the 69 other members on the other, and he gave every reason under the sun, but the other rabbis did not accept his reasoning. So Rabbi Eliezer starts to get frustrated, right? And he says, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree was uprooted 100 cubits, but some say 400 cubits. And the other rabbi said, nice magic trick, basically, but that's not the way we prove halacha, right? We don't bring proof from the carob trees. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it, and the stream starts flowing in the opposite direction. And they said again, nice magic trick, Rabbi Eliezer, but you don't prove halacha from the stream. Just is this story like vaguely familiar to you? You've heard it or studied it at some point, maybe. Okay, we'll go on. All right. So Rabbi Eliezer then said, if the halacha is accordant with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it, and the walls of the study hall start leaning inward, beginning to fall. And Rabbi Yoshua, right? And remember, we just studied Rabbi Eliezer and then Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua basically says, hey, walls, butt out. Okay, this is not your province. If Torah scholars are contending with each other, why are you getting involved? Right? So the walls did not fall because they had respect for Rabbi Yoshua, but they didn't straighten up, right? Because of the deference due to Rabbi Eliezer, and they still remain leaning. Okay, now, still 1,500 years ago, I'm not sure they still remain leaning now, considering that this is taking place in what's now Iraq. And even, I'm sure if the study hall was standing 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's probably not still standing today. Probably been bombed or whatever. But at the time, those walls were still standing. Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer then says to them, if the halacha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. And a divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer? The halacha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses an opinion. A heavenly voice, meaning like God. Right? So you could say instead of 69-1, it's now 69-2, right? Or you could say, well, since, all of this presumably originates with God and represents God's will, right? If God says, hey, Rabbi Eliezer's right, that really should settle the matter, right? You would think, maybe. But Rabbi Joshua not having it, right? Rabbi Joshua stood on his feet and says, it is written in the Torah, it is not in heaven. Right? Meaning the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai. We do not regard a divine voice because the Torah says follow the majority. All right. The Torah, in other words, God, yes, God, you gave the Torah, right? But you gave the right and the duty to interpret it to us, the rabbis. Your role in the system is done, right? Your role in the system is done. It's now the rabbis who determine the halakha, not you, right? So you butt out, right? And Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah. What did God do when Rabbi Joshua said this? And Elijah said to him, he smiled and said, my children have triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. And then after this, Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated from the group. Okay. Now, first of all, thoughts, comments, questions on the Talmudic passage that we just read. All right. I mean, I will tell you that that we conservative rabbis in particular love this passage and love teaching it. Okay. And the question is, why? I mean, what is the import of this passage and why especially, for conservative Judaism? Yeah, Marilyn.
Is it because of the knowledge of free will and making a choice other than what was commanded at Sinai?
I mean, I get what you're saying, and I think you're right. I think that's not a way that I would phrase it, right? I mean, the point, I mean, here's how I would phrase it, right? Is that the legal system was given at Sinai, not necessarily the outcomes of the legal system, of the debates within the legal system, right? And that it is both the right and the duty of the rabbis of every generation to interpret the law in accordance with the needs of their particular community and their particular generation, right? And moreover, that this is legitimate, right? Like you basically can't say, well, okay, so the rabbis interpreted it that way, but they're wrong because I have a direct pipeline to God. No, you don't. I mean, God butt out, right? God created the system and gave it to the rabbis, right? And there's no, I mean, it's like, I'm a litigant and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court, right? And the Supreme Court rules against me. And I am absolutely convinced that the Supreme Court is wrong, right? I can't hop in my car, get on the Beltway to Interstate 66 to US 29, drive down to Charlottesville, go to Monticello, and say, Mr. Jefferson, please tell the Supreme Court that they got it wrong. Okay? That's just, I mean, even if I somehow could conjure Jefferson up from his grave and bring him back with me to DC, that's not the way the system works, right? The Supreme Court, they may be right, they may be wrong, but they're final. Right? They're final. That's the way our system works. Okay? And we will probably sometime in the next week or month see if that's still the same way our system works. Okay? Because, no, I mean, I'm being serious, right? Because we all know this. At some point, Supreme Court is going to issue a ruling that he who shall not be named doesn't like. Is he going to follow it or not? Right? And if he doesn't follow it, then who the hell knows? Mike, you had your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, just to your point of why conservative rabbis like this, it legitimizes the process of writing teshuvot, which even when that's done, it's always done ever so cautiously and with, on the other hand, a second teshuvah generally, so that, but at least it gives the conservative rabbis the option. It gave us a kosher Zoom, for example, where the Orthodox who don't buy into the concept kept showing up in person. Thank God they seem to have all survived. But this could be taken to be the basis for that difference between conservatives and Orthodox.
Yeah, I mean, at least the way we read this. Right?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, the meaning of the text is determined by who reads it. Right? So now, okay, and this is not meant to be like a class on this text, right? But after this, Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated. Okay. And the story actually goes on, and it's even much darker than that, but not relevant for our purposes. So, question: why was Rabbi Eliezer excommunicated? Yeah, Marilyn.
Because he tried to get God on his side rather than go with the majority as he should have.
All right. Yeah, but why is that wrong? I mean,
Because
because
he
it
didn't,
is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
he didn't adhere to rule of the community. He was trying to be an exceptional person rather than live within the community.
Right. Okay. That's very good. I mean, based on, the Mishnayot that we read just before this, right? right? I would say, but I think is not fundamentally different than he didn't play by the rules of the system, right? I mean, it was all well and good as long as the system was giving him the outcome that he desired, right? But the minute that the system was not giving him the outcome that he desired, he circumvented the system, right? And I mean, to me, the contemporary relevance is quite obvious, right? I mean, the problem is that we have, and the other rabbis said, as much as we respect Rabbi Eliezer, we have to vote him out, right? Unfortunately, you have, frankly, a Congress that refuses to do its job, right? If they had not refused to do their job in January or February of 2021, he wouldn't have been eligible to be reelected. And they're still refusing to do their job, right? Because they all know that what he's doing is unconstitutional. They just don't care because they're terrified. And if you have a part of the system that refuses to do their job, the system also collapses, right? But he violated the rules of the system, right? Now, even though, as I said, a very strong argument can be made that objectively he was right. I mean, God agreed with him. God agreed with him, right? And I said this flippantly, but it's essentially what Rabbi Joshua said. He said, fine. So the first vote was 69-1. Now it's 69-2, right? Or not, but really not even that. It's really still 69-1 because God, you don't get a vote, right? And the fact that God agreed with him in the continuation of the story, right, is that yes, he gets excommunicated, right? But when they tell him that he's excommunicated, there's all kinds of natural disasters, right? The barley crop is destroyed, dough swelled in women's hands, et cetera, right? Because God, and so, I mean, to get back to Mike's point, right? The Orthodox could say to us, right? What are you doing? You're going against God. You're going against God, right? So, you could read this text, right? I mean, the meaning of the text is controlled by the reading community. There is no, frankly, objective meaning of the text. Okay, but yeah, so
I have a question about when would you say that this was written? Like, was it when the temple was still around?
no. No. This is after the temple. I mean, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua lived after the destruction of the temple, but before 200 CE, because they're in the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was codified around 200 CE. Okay, and then the Gemara is codified for 500 CE. But obviously, recording stuff from much earlier, right? Because it, if they were around in 200 CE, they weren't still around in 400 CE, right? So this is like recording stuff that was passed down orally. So I'm not, so I'm gonna, again, this is not my expertise, but I'm gonna say that this text is from around 400 CE, but Rabbi Joshua and Rabbi Eliezer are living around a little bit before 200 CE.
So
Okay.
I'm sorry, did
Yeah.
the tradition of the rabbis presenting different viewpoints and kind of arguing over passages, was that gotten from, like, did they have arguments like, or discussions like that between the Pharisees and the Sadducees
Yeah, absolutely.
earlier?
Sure. Absolutely, right? And frankly, if you want to capture what those disputes were, read the Gospels. No, seriously, right? That is, look, Matthew, Mark, and Luke were Jews, right? And if you ask them, what religion are you? They would have said, we are Jews, right? They would not have said they were Christians because the term didn't exist. And they didn't think that they were anything other than Jews, right? Because now they belonged to a specific Jewish sect that had different perspectives than other Jewish sects, right? But in the same way that, an Orthodox rabbi may say of us, we're not practicing Judaism, or certainly we're not practicing Judaism properly. They wouldn't say we're not Jews, right? And similarly, that's what we say about the Reform and the Reconstructionist, right? We say they're not practicing Judaism properly. We don't say they're not Jews, right? And similarly, I think at the time of the Gospels, that's what these rabbis would have said. You're heretics, okay? You're heretics. You can only be a heretic if you're part of the community, right? An Orthodox rabbi would call me a heretic, right? A Christian isn't going to call me a heretic, right? They may call me an infidel. That's something different. An infidel is an unbeliever, right? But a heretic is somebody in your community who has the wrong ideas about the rules of your community, right? So, yeah, so this debate, you really could say it's even in the Torah itself, right? When Korach confronts Moses, right? When Korach confronts Moses and says, all the people are holy, right? Why do you, it's the nature of Judaism to have these kind of disputes. All right, so now having looked at this passage, let's go back to the two Mishnahs that we just read. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer said, let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own. Okay. And now here, again, I didn't want to get too bogged down. But the end of this story is that all right, so even though the disputants are Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua, Rabbi Eliezer actually believed that it was Rabban Gamliel who set this whole thing up so that he would be excommunicated. Okay? And interestingly enough, Rabbi Eliezer's wife was Rabban Gamliel's brother. Okay, so they were brothers-in-law. Rabbi Eliezer prayed for Rabban Gamliel to die, and Rabban Gamliel died. And the Talmud said, and that's actually where the phrase that kicks off this whole story, all of the gates are closed except the gates of wounded feelings, right? In other words, Rabbi Eliezer was so hurt that he was excommunicated that he prayed for his brother-in-law to die, and his brother-in-law died. Okay, so let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own. Okay, they didn't do that for him. But be not easily provoked to anger. Well, I think we could say that he did not take his own advice here, right? I mean, he clearly lost it, right? A few times, right? A few times. And repent one day before your death, which he didn't do. But, right, warm yourself before the fire of the wise, but beware of being singed by their glowing coals. Their bite is the bite of a fox, sting the sting of a serpent, of a scorpion, etc. And all their words are like coals of fire, right? He experienced that, right? He got burned, right? He got burned, right? So, I mean, I think, because frankly, it only occurred to me this afternoon, oh yeah, this is Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua, right? But when you're familiar with that story and you read this Mishnah, in light of that story, it gives it a different valence, I think, right? And similarly, an evil eye, well, maybe not so much, but the evil inclination and hatred for humankind put a person out of the world. I mean, I'm not sure that Rabbi Eliezer hated the others, but he didn't, right? He separated himself from the community, essentially, right? By not playing by the rules of how the system is supposed to work. Okay, so at least to me, and maybe more so to me than to you guys, because Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua have been my companions for 40 plus years. But I do think that knowing this story gives, like I said, a different valence to these Mishnahs. Comments, questions, thoughts?
But would
Joe?
a communication have been reversed at some point?
It could have been, but it wasn't, because that would have required him to repent, right? And what would repentance have looked like? I mean, especially after he basically prayed for Rabban Gamliel to die and Rabban Gamliel died, right? But that would mean admitting that he was wrong, right? And I just don't get the feeling that this was something that he was capable of, right? I mean, I mean, I said this in my drasha this past Shabbat, right? And I've said it in other contexts too, right? We live in a society such that when somebody screws up and takes responsibility and says, yeah, I really screwed up and I apologize and I take full responsibility for the wrong that I committed and the harm that I did, it totally throws people off, right? Because nobody does that, right? Nobody does. Oh, the sun was in my eyes, right? The rim was bent. What? I mean, nobody, I mean, people don't take, I mean, frankly, in my experience, it is very rare for people to take responsibility. And right, and so Rabbi Eliezer would have had to say, yeah, I was actually wrong. And I just don't see him as the type of person who was willing to do that. So while yes, in theory, his excommunication could be reversed, and certainly there are other cases of excommunications being reversed, his was not, at least as to my knowledge. All right, anybody else? Okay, so we'll go on one more Mishnah for sure. Okay, Rabbi Yosei Omer, Rabbi Yosei said, Yehi mamon haverha haviv alecha kishelach. Let the property of your fellow, your comrade, be as beloved, as precious to you as your own. V'hatken atzmecha lilmod Torah she'ena Yerusha lach. Make yourself fit, prepare yourself to study Torah, because it's not given to you by inheritance. Meaning what? You can't simply say, well, my father was a great scholar, my grandfather was a great scholar, so Torah study will come easy to me. No, it's not. It's not an inheritance, right? I mean, it's interesting. It is an inheritance, right? I mean, like when we do Hagba, right? Torah, 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 Tziva lanu Moshe, right? What's the next word? The next phrase? Mo Rasha Kehilat Yaakov, right? It's the same, it's conjugated a little differently, but Mo Rasha and Yerusha come from the same root, right? Yud Resh Shin, which means to inherit, right? So the Torah which Moses commanded to us is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, right? So the Torah is our inheritance, right? So it's not, he's not saying the Torah is not your inheritance. He's saying like, Torah scholarship is not your inheritance, right? You're not automatically a great scholar just because your father and grandfather or, whatever, going back however many generations were scholars. That's not the way it works. You have to make yourself fit, prepared, worthy, etc., to learn Torah. Okay, v'chol ma'asecha yehiyu l'shem shamayim. Let all of your actions be for the sake of heaven. For the sake of heaven is a rabbinic euphemism, meaning for the sake of God, right? And so Bartanura says it gets back to the previous Yetzer Hara. Okay, let everything that you do be for the sake of heaven. And then Bartanura specifically says that this means sex and eating and drinking, right? In other words, now it sounds a little bit Catholic almost, right? Which may be not surprising because Bartanura lived in Italy not that long ago, like in the 1500s, I think. So he lived in a Catholic country, but he says, in other words, what does it mean when Bartanura is saying that your sexuality should be for the sake of heaven? Meaning for procreation, right? Right, meaning for procreation, right? That, look, if there's no kids, then there's no next generation of Jews, right? And then there's nobody to study Torah, do the mitzvot, etc., right? So that sex should be for procreation, right? That's, again, I don't know that that's what Rabbi Yosei meant. Bartanura says that's what Rabbi Yosei meant, and that's sort of the standard rabbinic commentary on Pirkei Avot. And similarly, eating and drinking, that you should eat and drink so that you will be healthy. Why is it important that you be healthy? So that you can do mitzvot, right? So, right, you shouldn't eat and drink because it's pleasurable. You should eat and drink because eating and drinking is necessary to keep us alive and to keep us healthy. Okay. And that's what Rabbi Yosei says, all your actions should be for the sake of heaven. Okay. The next Mishnah is a little bit long, so I'm going to say let's wrap it up here. Again, any questions, comments, objections, rebuttals to anything we've done? Please, I'd love to hear
So, Rabbi, is what
it.
you
Yeah,
were,
Sue.
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sue. Sue, and then Joe.
Well, I mean, I was just going to say that I still think excommunication for his point of, I understand what he did wrong, but it seems a little severe. I mean, it's not like he, did a mortal sin, I mean, couldn't they have handled it differently? Or, Am I looking at it wrong? I feel like it wasn't that horrific.
Well, no, but first of all, they did try to handle it differently, right? I mean, it's not like Rabbi Eliezer went directly from the argument to invoking the divine voice, right?
Mhm.
He did the carob tree, and they said we don't bring proof from carob trees. He did the stream, and they said we don't bring proof from streams. He did the walls of the study house, right? So this is already his fourth attempt to go outside the system. It's not his first,
Okay.
right? And so here's the thing. I mean, and again, it has contemporary relevance, right? I mean, there is this concept in the Talmud, and I'm so glad that you raised this, okay? Because there's this concept in the Talmud of the Zaken Mamre, which means the rebellious elder. Okay, so meaning, rabbi, member of the Sanhedrin, whatever. Okay, and you have a perspective that is different from the consensus. You have the right to teach your dissenting perspective. You do not have the right to act according to your dissenting perspective or to instruct others, right? You have the right to teach your perspective because maybe at some point in the future, the consensus will change, right? And your perspective, which is currently the minority perspective, might become the majority perspective, right? And so, I mean, here's a contemporary application within the conservative movement, right? We have a standard of rabbinic practice that says members of the rabbinical assembly may not officiate at intermarriages, right? Is a conservative rabbi allowed to say, I think that rule is wrong, harmful, should be changed, etc.? Yes, absolutely. Does a conservative rabbi have the right to say, I think that rule is wrong, harmful, therefore I'm going to officiate at intermarriages? No, right? In other words, Rabbi Eliezer wasn't excommunicated for having a different opinion, right? He was excommunicated for going outside the system, right?
Mhm.
And similarly, I mean, and that's why, the contemporary application, right? I mean, Chief Justice said, right? If you disagree with the ruling of the lower court, the remedy is to appeal, right? It's not to try and impeach the judge who made the ruling, right? No, but it's exactly the same thing. And similarly, right? I mean, because we're going to see this, right? I mean, I would be totally unsurprised if sometime Tuesday, maybe even tomorrow, some lawyer for the Justice Department is not thrown in jail for contempt of court by Judge Boasberg, right? And frankly, I will be very happy to see it, right? Because the remedy for feeling that the ruling of the court is wrong is to appeal. It's not to ignore the ruling, right? You follow the ruling while it's on appeal. And if you can convince either the judge who made the ruling to suspend his own ruling or the appellate court to stay the lower court, then that's all within the system, right? The system provides for, and you can even, if you lose all the way up to the Supreme Court, you're allowed to say, I think the Supreme Court erred. You're not allowed to say, I think the Supreme Court erred, therefore I'm just going to do whatever I want. No, that's not the way the system works. Okay, but that's exactly what Rabbi Eliezer did, basically. Okay, so I don't think, frankly, that excommunication was too harsh a punishment. But again, I mean, I live in this system, right, in ways that most Jews don't. Okay, so yeah, now, Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So were you saying in those two first passages we read that you think they reflected sort of beneath the surface the personality clash between the two rabbis, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, particularly the statements of Rabbi Eliezer, right? I mean, you could almost like chart where each of those statements fits into that Talmudic discussion that we read, I think. I mean, and I have to say, again, I mean, when you are dealing with texts that are 1,500 years old, right, probably no thought is truly original, right? I mean, what I taught tonight, I came up with. It doesn't mean I'm the first person who came up with it, right? I'm sure it's been written or taught elsewhere by others, but it just sort of hit me as I was preparing tonight's class. Oh yeah, this isn't just two schmoes. This is Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua, who are, constantly at each other's throat, but in particular in this, sugya of the oven of Achnai. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Shabbat
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Shkoach.
Bring him to you.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.